Good morning, everybody. What could be a more important topic than this on the final day of Davos? Soil, land, restoration. Everybody knows the bad news. 40% of the world's soils are degraded. We've lost about that amount of carbon from the soils. As a result, 3.2 billion people are severely affected. And every year, another 100 million hectares are being lost. And about, 15 million hectares are becoming desert. So that's the bad news, which I think we all know. And what we're going to talk about today is not just the bad news, we're actually going to talk about the momentum that's happening. Around the world, there are some remarkable initiatives. And the question is, can they really be scaled? And we have here a panel, and we have speakers that are leaders in this space. I should say I'm Andrew Steer. I'm the president and CEO of the Bezos Earth Fund. For us at the Bezos Earth Fund, this is an extremely important issue. We've looked at the data. We've seen that the rates of return on restoration are fabulous. We're a grant-giving organization. We've committed $1 billion to restore land worldwide, mainly in Africa. And we are thrilled with the progress that we're seeing, although recognizing it's very difficult indeed. We're going to start with a great honor. We've got the president of Iran here, His Excellency Iraq here, the president of Iraq, His Excellency Abdul Latif Rashid. It's a great honor to have you here, sir. What you're doing is quite remarkable. And if you would just come up here and share your thoughts, we would be very grateful indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the introductions. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad to be here with you. Let me start by saying water management, as a water management engineer, for a number of years of experience. I have spent much of my time in professional life addressing the issue of water shortage, and sustainable land use. These challenges are not new for any of us, nor they are abstract. They are urgent realities that require action, and I'm pleased to share Iraqi strategy for tackling these issues based on today's session on firmer ground with land restoration shines a spotlight on a global challenge and land degradation. With 40% of world's land degraded, we face consequences that extended beyond environmental concern. Declining agriculture, productivity, polluted waterways, and more frequent and severe drought threatens economics and livelihood across the globe. Sorry. In Iraq, we do face consequences of environmental challenges. Nearly 40% of our land is affected by desertification, and our essential for agriculture and livelihood are under severe strain. These problems are made worse by climate change, rising temperature, and reduced river flows from our neighboring countries. However, we are not standing idle. Iraq is taking bold and good steps to combat these challenges. And for sustainable development, allow me to share some of our key in improving the situation and the management of what we already have by promoting efficient use of water, irrigation systems, and harvesting rainwater to cover land and benefit irrigation. A 10-year National Federation program to combat desertification. This program is priority for reforestation, soil preservation, and sustainable agricultural practice. Expansion of Greenbelt. We are establishing a buffer zone around our cities to prevent desertifications using native and drought-resistant vegetation. These efforts are not just environmental, but they are economic. Land restoration is integral to Iraqi long economic plan. Development, particularly in agriculture, energy, and water security. Sustainable development is key to ensure growth without compromising our environmental health. We are also taking steps to transition to renewable energy. Additionally, we are promoting climate smart agriculture, diversifying crops, encouraging organic and regenerate farming, and mandating sustainable land use practicing through legislation. Addressing a water challenge requires collaboration between our borders. Iraq is engaged in ongoing negotiations with upstream countries, including Turkey and Iran, to secure equitable water sharing agreements for the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. These negotiations are essentials for the future of our region. Gradually, Iraq is working in international organizations and many other organizations like United Nations for Conventions to Combat Desertifications, the FAO, WFP, and the World Bank to adapt climate-resilient agriculture practices and gain access to the expertise for funding need to succeed. Ultimately, we know that lasting solutions require local actions. Mobilizing communities is at the heart of our strategy. Ladies and gentlemen, land restoration is not just environmental imperative. It is a moral duty. I want to mention really there are a number of factors, and unfortunately we haven't been successful to minimize it. First, the effect of conflicts and war, which has a large effect on land desertifications, especially the movement of military equipments and military hardware. Second, unfortunately, fire in many countries cannot be controlled easily, and it has got. Furthermore, cutting down forests and trees for building expansions for residents. These factors are very effective in affecting land desertifications, but unfortunately, until now, we haven't really got any policy how to control these factors. It is about safeguarding livelihood, protecting ecosystems, and ensuring sustainable future for our generations and future generations. Iraq is committed to this mission, and we look forward to collaborating with all of you to achieve our shared goal. And one further point which I would like to say, we attend many conferences and we attend many groups for solving desertifications or environment. But unfortunately, the actual achievement has been very little to show for. With that, I appeal to you that once we take some decisions for a better or for decreasing desertifications, let us action on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. President. I loved what you said about we know what we need to do, we're not doing it. It's set us up beautifully, and you also talked about the fact that it's actually a moral issue. And to solve this issue, it's an issue of the heart, as well as the head, as well as the hand. We're now going to turn to a really fabulous panel. We have senior representation from government, from research, from the United Nations, and from the private sector. And maybe we could start with Ibrahim Thor, who is the executive director, as you know, the head of UNCCD, the United Nations, to combat desertification. Tell us sort of the state of play. Where are we on the journey? You've just had COP16 in Saudi Arabia. I think it was successful. We're still losing rather than winning, but are we turning the corner? What makes you excited to get up in the morning?
Thank you very much. You just heard from the president of Iraq. This is not an environmental issue only. Land is what sustains life on Earth. And we know that the planetary boundaries that you may have heard about in terms of land management, we are not doing good. The Conference of the Parties, which was held just in December in Saudi Arabia, came up with a very clear message to the world, saying that land needs to be restored at large scale. We are no longer talking about piloting or planting trees. We are no longer talking about corporate social responsibility for business. We are talking about massive land restoration in order to be able to feed the world. If we are to produce twice as much food by 2050 as of today, which is really what we need to do with the growth of the population, we have got to reduce land degradation, and we have got to restore degraded land back to health. We need to restore 1.5 billion hectares by 2030. But by doing so, we are not only planting trees, we are actually restoring agricultural land. We are restoring pastoral land. We are protecting wetlands and forests and grasslands. And we are reducing hunger in the world. We are reducing conflicts. For competition for access to land and water needs to be reduced in the world. We are likely to reduce forced migration when people have to flee if they cannot produce anymore on their land. So restoring land is much more than just planting trees, even though it is important. Don't get me wrong, I'm a forester by training. But it will not be sufficient just to plant trees. It is important that we consider this as a massive undertaking from public and from the private sector for the good of business and for the good of the world. Land restoration protects our health. We know that there are many diseases that are associated to land loss and soil loss and to degradation of the environment. And mostly, land restoration helps us fight against climate change. If land degradation emits carbon, land restoration restores carbon back to the soil where it belongs. So it is therefore a very important thing. So at COP16 in Riyadh, there was a very clear message to business. We are here in the World Economic Forum. And we were very happy to have more than 400 from the business community, 400 people that come up with a very clear message on business for land. Because, again, they are not doing it as philanthropics. They are doing it because it is good business. 50% of the GDP comes from nature and from land. So it is therefore important that we protect it. Because by 2050, we may lose the equivalent of the size of South America if we are not reversing. So the clear message from COP16 is to say land restoration is good. It's a win-win-win situation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ibrahim. That was a wonderful framing. Let's turn to research. Ismahan Loafi, you are the boss of CGIR. That's the association of the best international research institutions on agriculture and forestry in the world. What are you learning? Where are we on the sort of intellectual journey here?
So on the intellectual journey of soil, we know very little. And the reality is that because maybe the soil, it's underground, we walk over it, we take it for granted, and we haven't yet discovered most of the things there. So for every gram of soil, you got billions of cells. You got millions and millions of taxa, but we know maybe 1-2% for them. But the little we know, Andrew, we know that it's very important because that's, as Ibrahim said, that's the beginning of agriculture, and that's what sustained production. So what we know now is that regenerative approaches is the way forward. And the regenerative approaches, it's using the synergies that exist in nature. It's using the fungi that are in the soil. It's using the mycorrhizas. It's using the micro and the pathogen and the microbes all together and understanding how we can make them all coexist and help us to produce more. So right now, the biggest innovation that we find is that by knowing what's in your soil and what you are producing, we could tell you where you need nitrogen, when you need phosphorus, and then we understand better the cycle. So that precision agriculture is very important. It's a combination of sensing methodologies and knowledge of the soil, what's in the soil. Does it need zinc? Does it need selenium? Does it need something else? And with remote sensing, that will allow us to reduce what we are putting in the soil and put just what is needed. But what we need to invest in more, it's really understanding the microbiology of soil. Because the soil, it's chemical reaction, physical reaction, and biological reactions. And I think we are not yet understanding that dynamic. We know there are synergies, but we are not yet understanding it very well. I remember a soil scientist told me a story of ants in Ivory Coast. He said, in Ivory Coast, some farmers got very annoyed because they have too many termites. And they didn't know that those little ants go deep in the soil to about 70 centimeters to bring copper up, because that soil was deficient in copper. So nature is beautiful, but nature needs to be understood. And we are not spending enough to understand what's in the soil, so that we can use nature to produce better and produce more nutritious food.
Wow, that's terrific. Yeah, somebody said that we know more about the surface of Mars than we know what happens the 2 meters below our feet, sort of thing. And the work that you guys are doing on soil is so exciting. And talk about regenerative agriculture, which is a word that's used a lot, and often it's used in different ways, but essentially you've summarized it. It's basically act in a way that the soil becomes more healthy rather than less healthy, the way that you operate things. So thank you so much. Let's turn to Minister John Steinhausen, Minister of Agriculture of South Africa. You're doing some very interesting things, and you're hosting G20 coming up. So what's on your mind in terms of this?
Well, great. Thanks very much, and great to be with you and the panel. Obviously, South Africa is one of the countries, 196 countries that has signed up to the global initiatives to protect soil. And I think what's important as both government policy makers and regulatory makers is that we take the evidence and the research and then translate it into actual action through policies and laws. And one of these examples is what we're doing in South Africa with the Land Preservation and Development of Agriculture Land Bill, which focuses on how we can maintain the quality of existing agricultural land and how we preserve and protect it, but also how we start to use agroecology to restore some of the land that's already been damaged through harmful agricultural practices. And obviously, bringing communities along with you is very important. There needs to be a buy-in and understanding from local communities precisely why soil is so important and why the preservation of soil is so important, both from a community health perspective, but also from a food security perspective as well. And we've seen over the last 20 to 30 years incredibly harmful practices being implemented in agriculture. The focus has been on maximizing yield, and we've just indiscriminately poured fertilizers and chemicals into it without understanding the deep long-term damage it's doing below the surface. And so we do need to educate populations and communities around why soil preservation is so important and why we need to move towards being able to have more sustainable farming practices. And I think the G20 gives South Africa, but also the G20 world and the global community, an opportunity to really take stock about where we're at, to look at how we've done with the Great Green Wall, how we've done with the AFF 100 on forests in Africa, to understand where we've done things well, where things haven't worked well, and to start to recalibrate. I think it also gives us a huge opportunity to start a more determined discussion about how as G20 countries, efforts could be made towards more sustainable farming practices, but also then how we find funding models through public-private collaboration to help bridge the gap to get particularly subsistence farmers and smallholder farmers onto more sustainable practices. I think they've caught up in a cycle of these harmful practices. They don't have the financial resources necessary to move immediately towards the more sustainable farming, regenerative agriculture. And I think we need to find some innovative funding models using the G20 time to bridge that gap and start to bring more along with us. So I think that we're alive with possibilities with the G20. But these things, I think, as the president of Iraq said so eloquently, need to go from thoughts on paper and research into actual laws and actual regulations and actual programs of government.
Well, thank you. That would be terrific if G20 this year could really put that on the agenda and do precisely what. Let's come back and talk about financing just a little bit later. Let's turn to the private sector. Molly Montgomery is Chief Executive Officer of Aero Farms. And you do things very differently in a very exciting way. Tell us about it.
Thank you, Sir Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. I think the panel's already outlined the daunting challenges that are ahead of us in preserving our food supply chain globally. I think it's essential that the private and the public sector collaborate very closely and work very closely together to take action, as was just outlined. I think one way we can do that is through innovation. And the private sector can definitely help with innovation. And one example I want to give of that is vertical farming. And the wonderful thing about this is it's available now. The technology is there. It's available to implement now, and we just need to scale. And the example of this is Aero Farms. So think of a large warehouse-style building with very high ceilings that is completely sealed off from the environment. This construction enables us to be climate agnostic. That means we can go grow plants no matter what the weather outside is. It can be snowing, it can be high heat, it doesn't matter. And what this does is it provides an unprecedented opportunity for food security in regions that currently cannot grow vegetables, to grow nutritious leafy greens and microgreens in a region and provide local supply. Unprecedented. And now turning to natural resources. As you go inside this building, we have towers erected, and because of Aero Farms' patented aeroponics technology, we can have these towers up to over 14 levels high. And we're growing microgreens on every one of those levels. This is a very efficient use of land. We're actually using 230 times less land than outdoor farming would need to use to grow the same amount of microgreens. 230 times. Not only that, we don't use soil and we don't use pesticides, so there's no soil degradation and there's no runoff. And because of aeroponics technology, you spray the roots with your nutrient mix, where you use 90% less water. The total area of the grow space is less than a hectare, and we can produce millions of pounds a year of microgreens.
Wow.
So I think this is completely transformative.
And would this work in anywhere in the world? Tell us about the costs of this and the investment costs and so on.
So the wonderful thing is just recently we've been able to provide and prove and demonstrate an economically viable solution, which has been the big challenge in the sector. Amazing innovation has gone on for a couple decades in this sector, but just recently AeroFarms has been able to prove economic viability. And I think as we look in the US and as we look around the world, I think we need to understand the cost structure, and we need to understand the size of the need, and we need to size the facility and put in the amount of automation that makes sense for that given reason to make the cost make sense. But I think we can do that.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Let's see, Ibrahim, you and others have made the point that we actually need all hands on deck here. This is not a silver bullet sort of solution. It's very complicated. You need the right policy, you need political momentum, you need, as the minister was saying, you need communities, farmers that need to change their behavior, you need the financial sector to come in. As you look forward now to, say, the next 2 years, where we really need to see a sort of positive tipping point, where do you see the most progress and where do you feel we see the least?
We are making good progress in large-scale land restoration. I think Minister mentioned the Great Green Wall in the Sahel, or the AFR 100 in Africa. The Great Green Wall in Southern Africa is also coming up. It's actually one of the potential outcomes of the South African G20 presidency. It is in their plan to have a Great Green Wall South. The Middle East Green Initiative, which was initiated by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, is now coming live with 200 million hectares. So in a way, I think there is a positive response coming up, that it is feasible, and we have to use all techniques, including the technique that Molly just described, because there are multiple solutions and we have to be very creative and very attractive. Where we are not making much progress is on reducing environmentally harmful subsidies and seeing how we can repurpose that to actually provide the funding that we need to restore more land. At the moment, we are using taxpayers' money to toxify the land and to degrade the land. It is about time for us to rethink all of this, because we are not going to get more public money available in the world. But we are still wasting, in my view, some of the public money by investing in environmental harmful subsidies that are degrading the land. So that we are not making much progress. And I hope at COP17 in Mongolia, this issue will be mentioned. We are not making good progress in terms of national policies that would incentivize private sector's investment on land restoration. At the moment, land restoration is funded through public money. Only 6% of the funding is coming from the private sector. So we have to understand why is it that economically, and all the economic studies that have been done say that it is profitable, it is feasible. Every single dollar invested in land restoration can generate between $7 and $30 of economic return. Why are we not seeing private sector investing in that? Either we are not communicating enough, or our figures, our economic analysis is wrong, or we are not providing the incentives that are needed by the private sector to invest on land restoration. It's a new shift. after the Paris Agreement, we have to see where do we invest that would be ecologically viable, economically acceptable, and socially feasible. So I think land restoration is one of them. So I really urge, and I'm very happy that actually the G20 presidency of South Africa has land restoration, desertification, and drought as part of its priorities. And we look forward to really having a major political policy shift through the G20 to the rest of the world in terms of land restoration and massive land restoration in the world.
That's very interesting. Thank you very much indeed, because it is a bit of a paradox, isn't it? The rate of return on land restoration is actually very high if done right, but actually it's not happening because there's just so much complexity in the system. In the programs that we finance, for example, under Africa 100 million hectares to be restored by 2030, which is an African Union initiative. Turns out that, I mean, literally tens of thousands of farmers and farmers groups and cooperatives and NGOs will be doing the work. But of course, that's a big learning program. So there needs to be quite a sophisticated management system. We need intermediating institutions which are now being built up. And you need to have the money to start with to build capacity, to do training, to create credit systems and so on. I wonder, Minister, as you sort of think about how you could use the G20, how your own government policy, how do you address these what are essentially quite complex issues? And you talked about finance in particular, if you'd like to say something on that.
Yeah, so I think finance, certainly in the global south, is a major challenge. When you have to convince a sort of small-scale farmer who's just transitioned from being a subsistence farmer to purchase the more biologically sensitive fertilizer or crop spray, vis-a-vis what he's been used to using for the last 20, 30 years, this bag is 100 Rand more,
yes,
he's going to default to the cheaper product because he's been using it. That's the cycle that he's been in. So it's about the education. It's about finding the bridging finance to transition, as yield will naturally drop in the transition, but also educating at that level that what this will do is ensure that your land will be sustainable for decades to come. If you continue with the harmful practice, your soil quality will decline.
Yes.
And then I think there's a huge opportunity by leveraging G20 to educate the public as well about, and make them far more aware about this important
Yes.
thing. Somebody picking up a lettuce or a cabbage at a supermarket isn't thinking about, well, you know, what soil has this come from? Where's it been? And I think that educating through the value chain to incentivize and reward those who have moved towards more sustainable farming practices is also going to be essential going forward.
Yes.
And that we do incentivize that reward so that farmers then are assisted to move across, and then they start to see the benefits of it in the short and medium term, and then of course reap the benefits of the long term of having good quality soil that can ensure food security for generations to come.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Ismahan, you in CGIR, you don't only do scientific research of soils and crops, but you also do behavioral research. And you're learning some very interesting things, including about knowledge from indigenous people. Do you want to tell us a little more on the behavioral side of things?
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrew. I think really, you said it, it's all at the system level. What we need to do is intervention at the system level. We tend to isolate things, talk about water alone, soil alone, genetic alone, and then we forget about its people there, its communities, its farming communities and people, particularly women, as a matter of fact, in a farming field. So what I think really we need to come to, it's that understanding all of it. So indigenous knowledge has survived for millions of years, and we know it, but we have never really looked into it and desiccated and say this is a trial that happened over a long time. It's not like us scientific, we do the trial in 3 places, 4 repetition or 6 repetition, but it's the same thing over time. So what we need to do is find ways of combining the two, indigenous knowledge over thousands and thousands of years with the innovation we have today, like AI, or like computing power that can build for us models that we have never dreamed of. So for me, really, it's system-level intervention. It's a bundle of innovation. There is no magic solution. It's not one. So that's where in the CGR we do breeding. We do agronomy. We talk a lot about fertility. We look at the water. And there is technology now that allows us, which is from the atomic energy. It's a non-nuclear technology that actually can monitor a carbon from the mountain till the sea, or a nitrogen atom. So we have now technology that will allow us to understand that cycle. So when we talk about circular economy, bioeconomy, it's all in understanding nature. And agriculture is a must. We can't do without agriculture, because agriculture, we all eat. I mean, I could have the latest gadget or not, but we all eat. Food is very important, and nutrition could be our medicine in the future if we do it right. But unless we transform the agri-food system, or as we say it in CGR, the food, land, and water system towards resilience, sustainability, efficiency, we can't get there. The problem I see myself in all the discussion we have in WEF, be it on soil, on water, and food, is that we are putting the burden on the farmer. So I say it as a scientist, that really regenerative agriculture is the way forward. No doubt about it. But it's not one model. It's about hundreds of models, different bundles of technologies. Yes. But we need to help the farmer through funding those 5 first years, because the yield will go down, and the farm cannot afford it. So we need to find systems, and I'm very happy here we have a president, we have a minister. We need to find public, philanthropy, private sector mechanisms to help the transition. And maybe the best way to do it is to really look at the energy, the just transition we did in energy. Let's do a just transition in agri-food system or in food, land, and water systems.
Great. Thank you so much. We're heading towards the end now. I'd like to, by the way, ask you all one final question, so I'll give you time to think about it. If you could just one sentence, I think we should, ... or I recommend we ... But before that, Molly, I think when people listen to your technology, they wow, that sounds incredible. And I can imagine 50 years from now us all doing what you're doing. But it doesn't sound like we're quite ready for that in many parts of the world. I know you've been thinking also about sort of how your technology could interact with regular agriculture, so to speak. Do you want to just say a word about that? Because it's not binary, it's not regular agriculture or vertical agriculture. I think there's sort of some kind of combination.
Yes, there definitely is. I think vertical farming can be very...
It's on.
I think it's on.
I think vertical farming can be very complementary to outdoor farming. Let me try to bring this to life through a quick example. I've heard a lot this week in the sessions I've attended about rice production and how critical it is to the diet around the world. But rice is grown in typically tropical environments, which aren't really conducive to growing nutritious greens. But what if in those same communities we could erect a vertical farm that would not take up much land, but would actually give them a way to provide their local region with microgreens that they've never had before. And the most important reason to do this is the nutritional element. Because microgreens are so highly nutritious, 5 to 40 times more nutritious than their mature vegetable counterpart. This starts to combine with rice to give an extremely balanced diet. And by the way, in vertical farming, you still need growers.
Yeah.
So we would love the expertise of the farmers in that community to also help within the vertical farming sector. So.
Wonderful. Yes. Thank you so much. So let's just go down the row now. Give us one recommendation that would really excite you over the next couple of years. Maybe start with you, Molly.
I think a larger collaboration between the private and the public sector, because I think that could be the magic that we need to really create action. That could really accelerate a lot of these solutions we need to face these challenges that we have, and I think it's definitely possible.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Ibrahim.
We have always taken land and soil for granted, and we have always extracted, and the mindset of extraction has always been in us. It is about time that we shift that to a management mindset, because this resource is not infinite. Thank you very much. Smahan.
I think we need to invest more in science and innovation. I think we should get to a minimum of 3% of GDP in science and innovation, because that's how we're going to find the new solutions. And I think that goes to all countries, not only high-income countries. Low-income countries should also invest, because those solutions should be everywhere, and every ecosystem might come with things that could be really beneficial for all. So invest in science and innovation.
Thank you. And finally, Minister.
We must take the science and innovation and the evidence-led discourse and translate it into policies that can then ensure sustainable farming, and policies and laws that are measured not on their sentiments but on their outcomes.
Well done. Thank you. Round of applause. Now we have, oh yes.
Can I just one small comment? Vertical farming is not...
Do you want just to, could we give you a microphone, Mr. President? There we go.
Vertical farming is good for producing what we need, but it's not related to desertification. Our problem is desertification, because it is the cause of climate change, and it is because of land is left unfarmed. So vertical, I welcome it, the idea of producing food by vertical food products, but that doesn't solve the desertification at all.
Thank you. That was a very helpful clarification, actually. We need to do both. Thank you, Mr. President. We're now going to have some closing remarks from the Deputy Prime Minister of Mongolia, His Excellency Dorkhan. Great. Thank you so much, sir.
Well, thank you very much for organizing this meeting, and also all the panelists. Thank you for sharing all these thoughts. Very interesting points. Well, I'd like to thank these organizers for the invitation to participate in this important event. And each year, the world is losing at least 100 million hectares of healthy and productive land, affecting food and water security globally. The United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification has shown us through its latest reports that land restoration is not just an environmental challenge, it is an opportunity to address some of the most pressing global challenges. As a nation whose identity and economy are deeply rooted in this land, Mongolia is both witness to the challenges and partnering in the solutions. For Mongolia, land is our lifeblood. Our steppes, deserts, rangelands, and forests support industries and communities and ecosystems. Yet they are increasingly vulnerable to desertification, overgrazing, and climate change issues, magnified by the harsh realities of our geographical location. Around approximately 76.9% of Mongolia's total land area is affected by desertification, primarily in the arid and semi-arid regions. Over the past 70 years, Mongolia's average air temperature has been increased by 2.46 in Celsius. A rate is significantly higher than the global average. And UNCCD's recent findings revealed that globally, 1/3 of the planet's land is already degraded, impacting nearly half of the global population and putting at the risk over $44 trillion of economic value chains dependent on the nature. And to confront this challenge, the Mongolia stands in solidarity with the global ambition to restore 1.5 billion hectares of degraded land by 2030 and achieve land degradation neutrality targets. And the President of Mongolia has been initiated 1 billion trees national movement has become a cornerstone of Mongolia's leadership on land degradation and desertification. This initiative aims to expand Mongolia's forest coverage area to 8.6% by 2028 and is a crucial component of the government's action program. Furthermore, inspired by UNCCD's Business for Land initiative, launched last year in Davos, Mongolia is actively engaging with the business and communities to promote sustainable land use, create green jobs, and ensure the restoration of efforts to drive economic growth. The land restoration also lies at the nexus of today's greatest challenge, the climate change, water security, biodiversity loss, and pollution. The UNCCD underscores that restoring land can reduce carbon emissions, enhance water availability, and boost biodiversity. In Mongolia, we are integrating these principles into our policy planning, focusing on nature-based solutions that mitigate climate impacts, conserve water resources, and protect our fragile ecosystems. Ladies and gentlemen, for Mongolia, 2026 is a very important year, because we will host the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists and lead as the host of UNCCD COP17. The countries hosting COP meetings often integrate in agenda showcasing the unique challenges onto global discussions. As one of the few countries representing nomadic pastoralism and steppe ecosystems, Mongolia introduced the proposal to launch a global coalition on rangeland, dryland, and pastoralism. During this December 2024 COP16 in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia that we have met, and emphasizing sustainable land management practices, this initiative seeks to bolster global environmental cooperation and resolve shared challenges. Well, the governments and development partners have expressed support for this coalition, which will operate as an independent structure with its own financing mechanisms. By collaborating with the similar platforms in Africa, in Americas, and other regions, the coalition aims to contribute significantly to global efforts to combat drought, desertification, and land degradation. While the 21st century is often called the era of technology, the environmental disasters over the past 2 decades have underscored that it's equally an era of environmental responsibility. It is about time to recognize the crucial role of rangeland ecosystems, which covers like 50% of our terrestrial surface, and maintaining the balance between mining and environmental sustainability. Under Mongolia's leadership, it is essential to foster a unified understanding among economists and policymakers, landowners, and private sectors, and the tangible contributions of rangeland ecosystems to our humanity. From the steering platform at the Davos, we call for enhanced cross-sectoral coordination and proudly reiterate our call for establishment of the Global Coalition on Rangelands and Pastoralists. Well, let us all come together under the principle of one for all for one, and the turn to the tide on land degradation, transform our commitments into action, and ensure a sustainable legacy for future generations. So we look forward to seeing you all in Mongolia in COP17 next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Deputy Prime Minister. We're looking forward to COP17. We are confident that you will lead it extremely well. What could be more important? This brings us to the end. I do believe we are at an inflection point. We've been losing the battle. And I think now we're at that point now. We're going to start seeing things improve if we do all the kind of things that we've heard about today from the President and from this wonderful panel and from the Deputy Prime Minister. We need to do many things, and we all have a role to play. One thing we need to do is change our attitude towards carbon, by the way. Think of those carbon dioxide molecules up there in the atmosphere, causing death and destruction, wreaking havoc. Bring them down here through the magic of photosynthesis into crops and soils and trees and bushes. where instead of death, they bring life and vitality, they increase incomes of farmers, they help us manage water, they bring resilience, and they make life better and more beautiful. And we need to sort of create a narrative by which this great transition becomes sort of irresistible and unstoppable. So thank you all for coming. Thank you to the World Economic Forum for raising this issue so effectively. We are really grateful. Thank you very much. Very nice.